Welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today, Caleb Henley. Welcome, Caleb.
Thanks, man. It's good to be here. First time doing
No,
a podcast, so it should be exciting.
is
Hopefully, I
it?
don't
Oh,
sweat too
hell
much.
yeah! You're the second person I've had the first time. The other person who was first time was Coach Howe from
Oh yeah, yeah.
Ethos.
Ethos.
Yeah,
Yeah, I regularly speak to Coach Howe. He's a good dude. I
there
think
you go.
he's actually. I was speaking to him because he's just moved overseas,
Yeah,
and
I saw that.
yeah, we were speaking a fair bit on Instagram because obviously he was trying to see what it was like living over in London and stuff. And I was trying to get him to get my job at the ballet. And then
Oh,
I think he's now in Spain, but yeah,
yeah,
Coach Howard we speak regularly. It's good.
nice. It's nice. It's almost like a little tight knit community. This sort of
Mm.
well, I mean, S&C is already small, but then you got S&C within a certain sport, and it's just
Yeah,
like tiny.
exactly. Everyone knows everyone. I mean, it's like a blessing and a curse because you're obviously trying to do your best in this S&C world, but if something goes wrong, everyone will know about
For sure,
it.
for sure. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, give us a little bit of your background, Caleb. What are you currently doing right now? You're crushing on Instagram, which is cool to see. So, if anyone who's listening, and I'll link it down in the description as well for anyone who wants to see as well. But give us a little background about yourself and what's going on.
Yeah, so I mean, like most S&C coaches, bit of a failed athlete. I grew up playing league
Yeah.
and quickly figured out that being like a 5'6", 65 kilos at the time was not big enough to play rugby league. Um, but kind of just always enjoyed training, like loved the aspect of training. I think I probably enjoyed that more than the actual games. Like I liked, pushing myself as hard as I can, going to the gym. Actually really got into the gym kind of when I figured out I was too small. And then obviously went down the route that most people go through, started uni, finished up my undergrad in 2019. And then that's kind of when I started doing my internships, did an internship at Athletes Authority here in Australia, then did one
That's with
at the Sydney.
Lachlan Wilmot, is it?
Yep, yep, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So did it with Lockie. Amazing environment there. Like everyone was super knowledgeable and kind of set the foundation of, I guess, my philosophy when it comes to S&C. And then from there was just working in team sports. Did football, basketball, rugby, all that sort of stuff. And then when I finished my undergrad in 2019, that's when my brother actually went pro for boxing. So he had his first fight, and then I guess that's how I started to get into doing S&C for boxers. Like did his programs, and then the people from his gym started hitting me up for programs, and then wasn't really too into like the whole online thing. I think I like still being a young coach, I wanted to get that in-person experience as much as I could because
Mm,
with online it's very different to coaching in person. I think you learn the most is
$100%.
if you're in person. Coaching, there's like only so much you can do online. So tried to get as much experience as I could in person. Then started my masters. That just dragged on for absolutely ever because of COVID. Like pretty much started that at the start of 2020. Got accepted for it, and then just all went down the drain with COVID. Like that was just an absolute nightmare. It ended up being 4.5 years instead of two.
Oh,
Yeah, bro, it was not fun. Like so, I actually finished it when I about halfway through my time living in London after starting it in like 2020. So yeah,
damn.
2024, halfway through there, it was just, man, I couldn't do it. It was like, I got so close to the point, I was just like, I'm done with this. But yeah, like I was saying, but just before we started recording, kind of about 6 months before I moved to London, the online stuff started was picking up more boxes. And yeah, moved to London. Like I was saying before, London's fucking expensive. Sorry for the swearing, but like,
No, go
yeah,
for it.
it was expensive. So I was like, I need to get a job straight away. And then whilst I was doing the online work with the boxers, luckily got a job at the Royal Ballet. And yeah, it's all kind of um, going from there. Like I kind of decided working in person full time wasn't for me. I think like I like to have, as like as an S&C coach, it's hard to have that work life balance.
It's
Um,
impossible.
it's impossible. Yeah, like very impossible. Like I mean, you would have had the same thing. Like doing an internship, my first internship, I was doing two at the same time.
Hmm.
Not getting paid for it, obviously getting like super valuable experience, but like I was just working in a little Egyptian takeaway store just to like make ends meet, and I was just like, "What is this going to be it? Like, is this
And
what
then
it's
you
going to be
wonder
like?"
why most S&C coaches are divorced and shit
Yeah,
like that, and
exactly. And I just recently met my partner. I was like, pretty much all weekend at the fields, or like catching up on study or doing my
Mm.
internship or whatever it was. So I was just like, fuck, is this what it's all about? You see like the flashy
Yes.
lights of, yeah, exactly. You see the flashy lights of pro sport and everything. You're like, fuck, if it's like this, I don't know if I really want it. And also, I think it's like partially I started following Kia around that time, and that's when he
Yeah.
was like really posting that strength coach money move stuff, and I was like, fuck, I'm gonna do this and see what it's like. And like I was saying, I started picking up a few boxes online. I was like, maybe this could work, but didn't really put too much effort into it. Like I was saying, I got to London, and then stuff started like slowly building and building, and then unfortunately for me, but also, I mean, I was traveling, so I can't really complain. That's when the stuff really started picking up within the last, 6, 8 months. Um, and then I kind of made the decision. I was like, let's just see if I can do this full time. And yeah, now I'm at the point where, yeah, just working full time with boxes online. So kind of
Nice.
a, kind of a, I guess, dream come true in that sense that I can have that work life balance.
Yeah, nice. It's good once you once you get that nailed down and you real. I mean, I think you have to go through it though, like the coaching full time, coaching in
Mm,
person, and then
yeah,
seeing like, whoa, like this is what the environment's like, and this is what it's going to be. And then once you start having sour experiences in places, it makes
yeah. And to be honest,
it makes it worse.
yeah, to be honest, I never really had that. Like, so after I finished my internship at AA, as I was doing my masters, I got a job at high school with my old boss Elliot Taylor, and he kind of was also training some combat guys. So that's kind of where I was also getting more
Mm,
interest into it. Um, but like, as much as I enjoyed working in a school, like a high school in the sense of like a private high school was like they've got the funds. We had a really nice gym. Like as I was working at the high school, like we had an amazing facility, and then I was also doing this internship at the Sydney Kings basketball, and we were training out of like a 6 meter by 3 meter gym that was pretty much nothing like all the scraps. But then I was at this high school, and we had everything, and so I had really good experiences. So I think I was lucky in the sense that I didn't really have the experience of having like bad bosses or athletes that were and just terrible. But yeah, I was kind of lucky in that sense. But I started to realize quickly that just working endless hours and especially weekends, I was just like, maybe this isn't for me. But I think that's where kind of online is that saving grace, because like you can get to the point where you're working online, and then if other opportunities come back up in person, you can start to take those more if you want. Like it's not like you're
mm.
relying on that coaching in person.
Yeah, that's a good call. You obviously mentioned you talked about a little bit about the Royal Ballet. Is there anything
Mm.
from there that's influenced your, I guess, as influenced you as a practitioner now in terms of, maybe there's things you take from programming for ballet that has made its way over into your boxing S&C?
Yeah, I think like there, I honestly had no idea what ballet was about when I got into it. I was literally like I was saying, like got to London, needed a job. The online stuff wasn't really paying the bills, so I got the job and was kind of like, all right, let's just see where this takes us. And luckily for me, my boss there, Shane Kelly, who's also Australian, um, kind of just threw me in the deep end and was like, here's the dancers you're going to be looking after. Go for it. There was a really good um, staff there. So, you could bounce questions off them, you could ask for advice and all that sort of stuff. But it was definitely the most elite environment I've worked in that sense. But I think the main thing that I probably took away from it is that S&C is so supplementary to the sport that you should never be ever taking away from the sport. You should always just be doing the bare minimum to make sure that they're ready to perform for that night. Because even in the ballet world, like it was, I think it's kind of changing now, but 5, 10 years ago, the dancers would tell me that you would just never jump into the gym because they were scared of being bulky. They were scared of
Mm.
slowing down and all these things. And it's such a aesthetic sport as well, along with the athleticism of it, that yeah, they were just too scared to really do anything. And I think in that sense, boxers are very much the same. Like I post about it all the time that you're not going to get bulky from lifting weights, and you're not going to slow down. And there's still like all these guys that are like, no, you lift a weight, you're going to turn into a bodybuilder, or your muscles are going to get too big. So I think the probably the biggest thing is like making sure that you're doing the bare minimum just to make sure that they're ready for the rehearsals or whatever it may be. And then that kind of carries over into the boxing. Like, you're not going to smash a big session before a sparring day, or you're not going to do some crazy conditioning in the morning of your sparring day, or whatever day it may be. So I think just really emphasizing to the guys that I'm working with now is that, you know, your sport is the main thing, and that's what we're always going to try and emphasize. But we're never going to like really take away from that.
Well, I know this is a very general question, but what would you see as kind of like that bare minimum to move the needle for most boxers, in terms of maybe it's like S&C frequency, volumes in those sessions, maybe even like number of exercises, or anything that you would say would be kind of like that bare minimum?
Honestly, like I don't know if you've seen much of my posts recently, but just like lifting some heavy weights. I think like so many boxers are so accustomed to, and boxing is such a traditional sport in the sense that like heaps of running, heaps of like these hit circuits that their gym will call their S&C sessions, but in reality they're just like making you feel tired, doing all these things that basically just make you feel tired for the sense of like, okay, I've done the work, I don't really need to do anything. And probably the biggest thing I found to move the needle for most boxers is lifting some heavy weights. Like, I mainly preach just two full body sessions a week. And, you know, we're going to do some sort of like hinge, some sort of squat over those 2 days. We're going to do all the standard movement patterns like vertical push pull, horizontal push pull, all that sort of stuff, and kind of just fill the areas. But the bare minimum is just two, you know, full body sessions a week where they're actually getting some good quality strength work in. And like, it doesn't have to be these crazy high volumes. Like, I've had some guys come to me and they're doing like 4x8 or 4x10. I'm like, let's just do let's just do like a 3x5. And for the first 4 or 5 weeks, and let's see what happens. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to get stronger. They're going to see that, you know, their punching power is starting to improve. They're noticing less injuries because they're not overtraining from these crazy high volumes of strength training. They actually feel fresh for their boxing sessions. So like, the bare minimum I'm getting most of my guys to do at the moment is just do like a good block of heavy lifting. But like I was saying before, the main thing is like telling them, you know, you're not going to turn into this bodybuilder if you start lifting these weights. Like, most of them are going to be in like these maintenance calories, or in a deficit anyway, especially if they're going into camp. It's going to be pretty much impossible to put on some good size. So let's just lift heavy for a little bit, see what happens. And yeah, like I said, 9 times out of 10, they're going to get some good effects from it, because the HIIT training that they're so accustomed to, the body weight circuits, the running, it's like, you know, it's hitting that point of diminishing returns.
Is there a bare minimum conditioning that you typically add, or you just leave that on the sidelines until maybe further down the line?
Conditioning, was that?
Yep. Is there like a bare minimum conditioning that you like to prescribe there too?
Yeah, so I'm pretty much programming conditioning for both of those full body days. Now it obviously like depends on where they're at in camp and what their conditioning is like. So when I start with the boxer, we're doing some testing just to kind of get some benchmarks. And then, yeah, pretty much from the get-go, we're doing some form of conditioning. I know my ideas of conditioning are slowly starting to change and be more in line with a bit higher intensity work. I think like a lot of boxers are getting that low intensity work from their like low intensity technical work. A lot of them are still running regardless, even if I preach that running's bullshit. A lot of them are still running, and 9 times out of 10, it'll just be like a casual 5K 2 or 3 times a week, or kind of that low intensity. So my ideas on conditioning and thoughts on conditioning are slowly moving towards like the higher intensity model. So, you know, if we're out of camp, we're probably going to be doing some form of like longer hit, a little bit lower intensity. As we start to transition into that, you know, getting closer to camp, we might transition to some shorter hit, a bit higher intensity. And then typically throughout camp, if like we've got a 4 to 8 week camp where we're really pushing it, that's when I start to go to more like sprint interval stuff. A lot of my stuff is based off like Andrew Rusher and John Brabraj. I think that's how you pronounce it. Yeah, who I've listened to on your podcast before and looked into a lot of their research. I think those are like
some of the most influential and popular podcasts, because Andrew was telling me like he's been hit up by like so many different coaches just from those podcasts. And
yeah,
I think it's changing the game.
100%. Sure. Like, I mean, I don't know, conditioning is especially in boxing, but like in the S&C world, like obviously a lot of coaches are super nailed in on the strength work and can,
Conditioning's always
program
left behind.
can program, yeah, exactly, can program strength and power till the cows come home. But and I was that, like, as I was doing my internship, like it was mainly being on the gym floor coaching strength and power, pliers, all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. And so my conditioning kind of got left behind, and I never really thought that I would go down the route of boxing where conditioning is a massive element for them. So as I started getting more into the boxing side of things, I was like, well, I really need to touch up on my conditioning and how I'm actually programming that. And so like most people that are working with combat athletes probably read, Joel Jamison's book. And
Yeah.
that's where I kind of based a lot of my stuff off. And then, yeah, as I started listening to the podcast with those guys we mentioned before, and then reading up on those research, they've been super influential in how I start to program as I get closer to camp.
Yeah, it's shifted my whole conditioning perspective too. Like same thing. Like I think we all come in from a strength power background for sure, just because I think it's just what's taught really. Conditioning
Yeah,
isn't
exactly.
really
Yeah,
conditioning's kind of left for the endurance sports.
yeah,
You learn that physiology, but for everyone else team sports, it's all strength power, and then the conditioning is like, oh, we just do, if it's in rugby, we just run Malcolms and coat
yeah,
hangers and
yeah,
all that
exactly.
random drills and stuff like that. So okay, cool. And
Yeah,
then when you start diving into it more and you start, like, yeah, as you mentioned, the first resource is often Ultimate MMA conditioning, and you go,
yeah,
oh, Zone 2, and then obviously Zone 2 is a big thing now, and then you're like, wait a
yeah, yeah.
minute, you
Is
know,
it? Do they really need it?
yeah, exactly.
I was
And
like, I was so, as everyone was like, what was it, like a year and a half ago, 2 years, when Zone 2 started to become a massive thing, I was like, Zone 2 is all they need. They don't need anything else. For a high intensity sport, they only need Zone 2, and they're going to
Yeah,
become elite athletes at Zone 2. But then I started to like think more about it. I'm like, you need that much volume for Zone 2 to do anything. They're already probably hitting it, so many times throughout the week. Like, what's the point in me really just prescribing like another hour and a half of that throughout the week, which is, for one, just boring. Like, if you've ever actually
yeah,
sat there and done Zone 2 work, I'm like, I do 10 minutes of it. I'm like, well, this is boring. I'd rather do something else. And for boxers who already have no time throughout the week, like they're already doing all these other things when it comes to
hmm
training, I'm not just going to load them up with that. So that's when I started to transition to, that long hit, short hit, and then getting into that sprint interval stuff.
Funnily enough, because obviously when it became very popular as well, I was thinking back the other day, just through all the various athletes and teams that I've coached through, and I was like, I've never actually programmed low intensity steady state for anyone, for any of the sports. I was thinking
Yeah.
like, shit, I didn't even realize it's just like not even a thing. Even after reading that, it just didn't fit. I
Mm.
had other models, so just like, not saying like I was like, oh, I didn't need Zone 2 at the time, whatever, but it's just like, just thinking back and like, it kind of cements the idea maybe it's not something that is
Mm.
needed. And obviously with the research coming now and what they're doing out of Abertay University
Yeah.
there, it's kind of like there's potentially a better way to go about it. And as you mentioned, man, schedules are packed. Like I'm sure, like how many times a week are your boxers boxing? Like it's up to 6+ times.
Oh man, some guys, like I've got a guy in camp at the moment fighting much first, and I think he's doing doubles most days.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, that's obviously not all boxing, but he'll be boxing at least 7, 8 times a week. Sorry, and then on
yeah,
top of that, with his S&C, and then his gym has him running as well. So
mm,
yeah, it's like it's too much to then ask them to be like, go and sit on a bike for 45 minutes twice a week or whatever it may be. So I'm just
yeah,
like, what can we do that's going to be the bare minimum? Obviously, then it becomes a thing of like, where do we fit in everything? Like, how are we going
yeah.
to manage the stress over the week? And that's where, like, I'm mainly trying to use that high-low system. But even then with boxers, they're still,
It's tough.
like, yeah, it's tough. They always think that sessions have to be really hard or it doesn't really matter. So then it's just about figuring out where everything fits.
How does that typical week structure look for you then? Like what would be your ideal way of setting it up, and maybe what is the compromise then that you've had to make for someone like that?
Yeah. So typically, like, I try and compare it to like a sport that has that one game day. So typically with, sports, it'll be like a Saturday game day. So with boxing, it's usually they have a big sparring session on that Saturday. This particular boxer is sparring twice per week, so he's on a Wednesday and a Saturday, and they're pretty. I wouldn't say the Wednesdays are as hard as the Saturdays. Saturday is pretty much a fight sim. And so we're basically just basing those S&Cs and the conditioning around those days. So obviously the Saturday is probably going to be one of the highest days of the week in respect to like intensity. So I'm typically trying to get him to do that other S&C session on that day. I like them to, if they can, pair their strength and the conditioning on the same day. Some guys prefer to do it on other days, but yeah, at the moment he's doing sparring in the morning and then S&C in the evening on that Saturday. So that's going to be one of his higher days. And then the Wednesday is also a really high day. So he's going to do I think he's got at the moment strength in the morning on that Wednesday, and then the sparring in the evening, strength and power in the morning, sparring in the evening. Mm-hmm. So Wednesday and Saturday are basically his super high days where, yeah, he's cooking his central nervous system. It's going to be pretty intense in that respect. And then we're basically fitting in everything else around that. So he's also got his technical stuff, a lot of partner work that we've got to fit in around that. So typically like the Thursday is a bit of a lower day after that Wednesday, which is a higher day. And then Sunday he typically has off. And then we basically just build up. So Monday he builds up, Tuesday is like a medium day, Wednesday is that high day, Thursday back low, Friday a little bit medium, and then Saturday again is that big high day. So kind of trying to fluctuate between intensities throughout the week. But again, sometimes their gyms turn around and be like, actually we're sparring this day, or training's changed to this day. So we kind of just, I think that's the main thing with online coaching is like you got to be responsive and reacting to what they're doing, especially with boxers, because their schedule can change like that, and their coaches can be like, oh, right, we're doing this day, and fuck everything else. So it's just like managing them throughout the week. Like obviously you're writing the programs and everything, but I'd say like a lot of my time just comes down to reorganizing what's going on throughout the week, because stuff changes all the time.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned as well like I think it was conditioning tests they do when you initially come in. Do you want to maybe just run through some of those and what you're looking for?
Yeah, so I think that's also changed within the last, I wouldn't say the conditioning per se just by itself, but what I'm actually doing for the test in general, because, online coaching is way harder to do testing because obviously you're not there with them. You can't standardize a lot of things. You don't have the equipment that you might have in person. You might not have the technology in person. So I was like, initially when I started out, I was doing jump tests with my jump lab. I was doing strength tests, I had some VBT there, and was doing the conditioning, and then I just figured like this is way too hard. Like boxers already are thinking about way too much, let alone like having to set up the camera and film himself jumping and do all these like complicated things. So I've tried to make my testing basically as easy as possible for them. So at the moment we're just doing, for lower body power, we're just doing the broad jumps and triple hops. Upper body power, we just do a med ball throw at 5% of their body weight. Then we do trap bar 3RM, bench 3RM, max chins. And then for the conditioning, I've tried to make that as easy as possible as well. So we're just doing a 10-second max effort 3 times and just looking at their peak wattage. So for a power output. And then on the assault bike, again, we're just doing a 5-minute time trial just to get a measure of, I guess, their aerobic capacity. So that's when I then use that for that like long hit, short hit stuff. Because I think I was doing like RPE based conditioning for that longer hit, but I've just found either they're taking the piss or they're just going thinking that, or they're just thinking it's a sprint. So they're like, they'll turn around to me. It's like, so typically like a first block of conditioning might be a long hit, 4 minutes on, 2 minutes off at like 90% or whatever it might be. And when I was giving RPE, I'd do like a 7 to 8 RPE for that 4-minute interval. And they'd turn around to me and be like, oh, that was way too easy. Or another boxer would be like, man, I was gassed after a minute. I was like, what were you doing? Like, I was sprinted the whole time. I'm like, fuck, that's not what we want. So like, that's when I was like, all right, I'm going to transition to something where it's just like, hit this meters and that's all you have to do. Don't worry about anything else. So like in that respect, I'm just slowly transitioning to just making it as easy as possible, because I don't want anyone to have to think about what they have to do. I just want them to be like, all right, this is the numbers, this is what I have to do. So Yeah, those are the two conditioning tests I'm doing. So just that 5 minute time trial, and then the 10-second max output for those, for the peak wattage on that.
Do any of the tests uh, further influence your programming? So just if that power output during that 10 seconds and the 5 minute time, I don't know, maybe it's like some kind of arbitrary ratio, or the jumps or throws or anything like that. Does that influence maybe which direction their program goes?
Yeah, somewhat. Like, I don't know. I feel like, yeah, a lot of coaches will be like, this is going to completely influence my program. But for me, it doesn't, it will, but it won't. Like, I'm not going to change my whole program just to hit these certain numbers, or like say their broad jump is terrible. I'm not going to be like, we're just going to focus on getting that broad jump up. Like, obviously, I'm going to put some things in it, but I don't think it completely influences my program. I just want to make sure that they're not like the worst athletically wise for their strength and power and all these things. Like, if they are, then maybe we'll push those things a little bit harder. But typically, like, most of my programs will follow some sort of like team sport model, in the sense that they have got their off season, they're out of camp, they're transitioning to their pre-season, they're in like that kind of in out of camp phase, and then they've got their competition period, so they're going to be in camp. So we're still going to build some capacities out of season or out of camp and all these things, but I don't think it influences as much as most people sometimes say theirs influences them. And again, like, I'm doing some pretty basic testing. Like, it's not going to be the most influential stuff, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, for sure. You mentioned obviously the off season, kind of like preseason, in season. Do you want to maybe just run through generally maybe how some of that program changes? You talked about how the conditioning changes, maybe even the stuff in the gym, the strength training stuff, how that generally changes throughout those periods.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I usually work back from I always work back from when their fight is going to be, and I see most, like, the main quality that I'm looking to develop for a boxer is around that reactivity or that reactive strength, and that is probably like the main thing that I'm working towards as we get towards fight night. So I'm basically working back from there and figuring out what's going to influence that as we get closer. So typically, like, for example, if we're out of camp, and there's not really a fight in sight, we're going to be doing some sort of accumulation / capacity block. So we're going to be having some higher rep ranges in our strength work. Typically, our plyo work will be more extensive. Our ballistic work will be more extensive. Not really hitting high intensities, but again, if I've found something in their testing that they are just like absolutely terrible at, then I might just put a bit more of that into their program. Similarly, like, as we start to transition and we're like 12 to 16 weeks out, that's when we might to really start to hit that strength work. That plyo work will start to the increase in intensity, become more repeat efforts rather than just like single effort stuff. So typically, like, my plyo work will be like single effort jumps, more extensive in nature with the plyos, and then as we get sort of middle ground, will be more continuous, maybe up the intensity, and then as we're like really into fight camp, I'm really looking at like quicker ground contacts, really high intensity repeat jumps, and then with the strength work, it's basically what most team sports models would be like full range out of camp, higher volumes. But again, the volumes aren't really that high. Like, the most sets I would ever hit would be like 4 sets, but even that's very rare. And then as we're getting closer, reduce range for the strength work, up the intensity a fair bit. Like, I like to keep a lot of strength work in throughout, pretty much all the way up into camp. Up until the fight night. I think it would follow generally what like a team sport athlete would do, but with reactive strength and like reactivity be my, I guess, goal that I'm really trying to hit as we get closer to the fight night.
Do loaded variations like jumps and things like that also come in through that time?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's something that's changing for me all the time. Like, if they do come in, they're further out. I like them. I don't know, I'm still so torn on whether loaded jumps are actually going to do much for them. On one hand, I'm like, yeah, well, they're working power, or on the other hand, are they just like expressing their power? So same with med ball work. I'm also like, does med ball work actually work to increase their power outputs, or are they just doing or are they just expressing their power outputs with that med ball work? So yeah, I'm still torn on where that kind of fits in the program, but if it does fit in the program, it's usually more that outer camp phase, because obviously with that loaded work, they're going to like spend a lot longer on the ground. They're going to have more time to produce force. So that will be more outer camp. And then, like I was saying, as we get closer to camp, I'm more thinking on like reactivity, how quickly can they produce that force? So that's when it's like purely body weight stuff. But yeah, my thoughts are kind of always changing on that loaded stuff. It's a tricky one.
Did you see that paper recently with medicine ball throws, rotational medicine ball throws, and correlating with isometric mid-thigh pull and counter movement jump?
No, I think I saw your post on it. You'll have to flip it over to me so I can have a proper read. What they
Yeah. Basically, there's not much correlation between them in terms of jump kinetics and isometric mid-thigh pull, like force. I think it was peak and relative force on there. So basically being two independent qualities. So you could say medicine ball throws in that instance, whether it's a quality or a skill, it's separate enough to be a distinct on its own compared to, say, jumping and isometric mid-thigh pull. So potentially jumping higher or having better impulse during jumps or producing more force during isometric mid-thigh pull may not carry over to the rotational throw. Unless you may be doing rotational throw. Yeah, it's interesting. I thought it was an interesting paper.
I'll have to get a read, because I think I can't remember who posted about it, but they posted like this, what their whole thoughts on med balls, and this would have been like maybe a year ago now, and I just like kind of started thinking about it more, because again, they're kind of in that loaded realm, right, where it's not completely, you're not completely working velocity on one side, and you're not completely working high force outputs on the other side. But I guess where I do like med balls and where I really preach med balls is like some high velocity core work, and also working that coordination or like getting that force through the kinetic chain, for lack of a better word. So I do like them in that sense. And then obviously before a workout, just to really prime the nervous system or fire the nervous system up, because, you know, whether they're actually producing or increasing power outputs or whatever it may be, like if you throw a med ball as high as you fucking can, like you feel pretty powerful after it. So like I still think there's the psychological benefit of like getting ready for a session, all that sort of stuff. So I still definitely think med ball work has value, but yeah, I think I'd have to dive a bit deeper into like whether it's actually improving qualities that people think that it might be improving. So like, you know, punching power or whatever it may be.
Nice. You also mentioned about lifting all the way through until the fight. Do you want to maybe just give like a breakdown of the final couple of weeks leading into a fight, how the S&C might or might not change?
Yeah. So did a post about this the other day about like tapering and going into the fight. So typically, let's say we're still 4 weeks out. My 4th week will pretty much be the exact same as what the previous weeks would look like from intensity and volume aspect. And then pretty much from that 3rd to 2nd week out is when we really start to taper. So maybe the 3rd week, we're kind of tapering down to 80% of the volume to keep the intensity pretty much all the way up to fight night. And then 2nd week out, we're probably at like 50 to 70% of the volume that we have previously been lifting the few weeks out. And then that was the 2nd week. And then the week out from the fight, I usually just have the one session if they've just been doing the 2 strength and power sessions. But that'll just be a combination of the 2 sessions that we have been doing. But typically it'll be like the plyo work that we've been doing from both sessions, the ballistic work that we've been doing, and then maybe one small strength lift. So similar to just like a priming session, because I think it's important that we're not just like fully cutting everything out that week of the fight. Obviously it can be pretty tricky because you've got, you know, weight cutting going on. If they have media stuff, they've got to look after all of that. So there's a fair bit going on that week of the fight. But I do like them to try and get some sort of session in, even if it's like, you know, the typical priming session might be the night before the game or whatever it might be. But most boxers aren't going to want to do anything the night before the fight. They just want to chill out. So yeah, we'll probably do like a priming session, I like to call it, even though it technically isn't, maybe the Wednesday or the Tuesday, just to make sure those qualities are still sticking around. Because, you know, you could have that full week off of just cutting weight, but then fight night comes around and like you probably know it yourself. You don't do anything for a week and you feel that sluggish. So I just like to get moving. But yeah, typically from that fourth week or third week, we start cutting that volume, and intensity is pretty much staying the same throughout.
Is there on that final week as well? Is there conditioning involved in that week?
It depends. Like it depends what their focus has been leading up to it. And typically I'm working that sprint interval stuff. Like if we're doing, longer sprint intervals, like that 30-second, probably the max sprint that I would be prescribing, then no, I just reckon that's probably going to carry too much fatigue. If we've noticed that maybe their power output isn't where I'd hoped it would have been, then, and we might have had like really short sprint intervals. So like some ones I typically use will be like a 5 second on, 55 second off, really emphasizing like a max intensity, then that might be. Again, it kind of just depends on what they were doing leading up into that fight. But if it would, then it would follow the exact same thing as the strength and power work. In that three weeks out, maybe we've still got all of the conditioning in. Maybe 2 weeks out, we've got half of it. And then if they're doing like those shorter sprint intervals, they're still going to do it. Maybe they're just doing like 5 or 6 reps. Obviously, you're not going to get like a massive conditioning stimulus from it, but I think again, there's value in doing that just from like making them feel like they're going to be super powerful and giving them that, priming effect.
Nice. I saw a post recently you did on hand and wrist care for boxers. Do you want me to just dive into some of that? Because that's often I guess, forgotten area, at least within combat sports, strength conditioning programs.
Yeah. I actually had one of the amateurs I was working with had a pretty bad TFCC injury that was like ongoing for ages. And I guess that kind of made me dive deeper into that sort of stuff because, obviously you're fighting with your hands and that's going to be the first point of impact. So, I got more interested into that and how we can actually fit that into a program. And from a few coaches implementing like robusta circuits or resilient circuits or whatever you call it. So basically I've just tried to give people like a 3 to 4 exercise circuit that they can just put in the end of their session. And that kind of, for this boxer that had that TFCC injury, that kind of helped for a little bit, but he ended up having some like pretty bad tendon flicking every time he'd throw a punch or every time he'd clench his fist. So we had to kind of look into that further. But yeah, I think the main principles around hand and wrist injury would be similar to any other joint or muscle group, is like trying to make everything around that area as strong and robust as possible. So pretty much we're working through like grip strength. I love hangs for that. So like any sort of hang variation, whether it's like a dead hang, single arm, dead hang, alternating, like they're a massive one for me. Supination, pronation, and then obviously flexion extension. And then more previously, I've just been prescribing a lot of like radial and ulnar deviation. So yeah, I don't think it's anything groundbreaking, but I think it's like a small thing that a lot of boxers can implement just at the end of their session, because you don't really need much to get in some extra work. Like you could do, like I was saying, 3 to 4 exercise robusta circuit just at the end of your boxing session. And most boxing gyms will have like something you can hang from, a kettlebell, and maybe some bands or something you can do some wrist extension / flexion. So yeah, I've tried to integrate that a lot more because most boxers would have had some sort of hand or wrist injury throughout their career, and probably will definitely experience something like that. So if there's just something we can add into there to get hopefully a bit more volume or strength around that area, then I mean, I'm definitely going to be all for it.
Are you typically putting that at the end of the strength sessions, or maybe even in the technical boxing sessions as well?
Typically, it depends on how long they've actually got for their session, but because I like to keep the strength and power sessions like, the meat and potatoes of the stuff that we're going to do, because again, like we mentioned before, they already don't have that much time. So I want to make sure that when they're in the actual gym, they're doing stuff that's actually going to move the needle. So typically I'll put that just as like a separate session. So yeah, 3 to 4 exercise circuit where they're just hitting the main movement. So some grip strength, some supination, pronation around the wrist / forearm, and then some flexion extension, maybe some of that other stuff I was mentioning, and trying to get that done for at least 2 to 3 sessions per week. Some of them like to do it before their session as like a bit of a warm up to get everything kind of fired up. Some of them are like, I don't want to do anything before my boxing other than skip and shadow box. So that's fine. But I think if you're getting 2 to 3 of those in per week, and again, it can be on one of those low days, like if they don't have enough time in those strength and conditioning sessions, those low days can be like a really good place to put any of those extras that, you might not have time for throughout the week. So like, yeah, the wrist and hand, the neck, the shoulder, where, it's not going to be too fatiguing, but it could potentially save you from getting an injury in one of those areas.
So an example for that wrist and hand circuit could be like, as you mentioned, like a dumbbell, wrist curl, wrist extension, and like kind of like hanging for time.
Yeah.
Bar, and then just like that kettlebell, kind of like supination, pronation.
The triple G special. Yeah, every time I post that, everyone's like, Triple G did it. Triple G did it first. I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm not saying I came up with it. That's the thing with Instagram. Like, everyone's always going to say that someone did it first. I'm like, yeah, no one's recreating anything new on Instagram. Like, it's all just the same shit.
It's all recycled.
Yeah, exactly.
With a different hook.
Yeah, exactly. Do this and you'll never get injured. I'm like, but yeah, like typically, like a few of my favorites would be like the kettlebell turnovers. Massive fan of like wrist rollers, where you've got the band on the end of the barbell and you're rolling that up. Focusing on both flexion and extension. Hangs. I've been programming hangs for 2 or 3 years now. I reckon they're massive value for grip strength, but also like if you do a good hang, then your forearms will be absolutely pumped off it. So they're a massive part of my programming. And then just like standard supination, pronation stuff, and then some good ones recently, just like the radial and Ireland deviation, which like I was saying, I think for those types of things, I think it's important that they're as easy to do with minimal equipment, because if you're telling someone to do it 2 or 3 times a week and they have to go to the gym to do it, or they need all this equipment, then it's just never going to be a thing that they actually do. So those are robust circuits, just try to make as easy as possible. If it's not body weight, then it's like you need a kettlebell and 1 small dumbbell or something like that.
Have you done any of it with towels yet, like towel hangs?
I've actually got that in one of my programs at the moment, and they're killer. Hey.
Yeah, I love them. I love the towel variations, like weighted towel pull-ups, towel farmers walks. Even at one point I had we were what part of the season was it with the team? Or maybe it was coming to the end of the season. So for our arm work, we did partner arm work. So obviously, if someone's holding the towel for resistance, the other person's doing curls and shit. Like you're in jail. Like a prison workout.
Straight on jail workout. I'll have to get my missus to come into the gym with me so we can do some work together.
Oh, man. It looks funny. But yeah, but it's good. It's good, easy, cheap tool. But don't use cheap towels for anyone listening.
Yeah,
cheap towels can
you don't want to end up punching yourself in the face or anything.
Oh, exactly. I think that's everything I had for you, Caleb. Where can people find and follow you?
Yeah, so just on Instagram, Handley_performance coach. He posted that. Don't worry about TikTok. I just repost all my shit there. I can't be bothered to remake everything there. That'd be the main spot.
Perfect. I'll link that up in the description as well for anyone who wants to get in touch with that and follow you. Yeah, your Instagram's growing nicely. So
thanks,
for anyone who's after some boxing content, make sure you hit him up. But I appreciate you coming on, Caleb.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.